For my TIP project, I've decided to title it Thinking Bigger with Big Thinkers. I've created a cumulative project for my I-squared American Literature students at West Hall High School. So the first question you probably have is, what exactly is the I-squared program? The I-squared program is it's short for Innovation Institute, and it is a program founded at West Hall High School to supplement our IB program that we have at West Hall. It's a gifted program. It targets gifted students, but it takes a project-based approach with its instruction. Students apply to this program before they enter West Hall High School, and then once they're accepted, will travel in a cohort for the first 2 years of their high school career. That cohort will stay with the same teachers through those 2 years and working with an integrated approach, not only with project-based curriculum, but also with interdiscipline cross-curricular work. The program also has heavy technology integration and really works to develop these creative thinkers' minds and give them opportunity to create. You can see here when you get access to my presentation slides that I have a video link that is produced by our I-squared students that tell you all about this really great program. So you're likely saying, well, Beth, that sounds really great. What could possibly be a problem with this I-squared program? Technology-based, access to resources, all of these things sound wonderful. Well, I found that I had a huge problem because my I-squared students were bored. We're tired of doing projects, Mrs. Pittman. That's what I would hear over and over and over again. Every time I would try to begin a new project, come up with something creative for the students to work on, they had almost been beaten into this not wanting to create projects, not wanting to do this type of learning. And they were rather just more concerned with, what do they need to do to get an A? Well, what do I need to do to get an A on this? I really don't want to do this. I-squared program also gives me as a teacher and them access to a specialized lab. In this lab, students have access to technology centers with flat panel TVs, laptops, all different types of technology, tablets. It's a really incredible resource. But what I have found is that the students always want to go there because they need chill time. They saw the lab as a place to more or less play and not necessarily a place where great work can happen. I really just think these students were bored, and I spent a lot of time during the year trying to face this problem with them. How do I get them to get past this? I don't want them to be always concerned about grades. I really want them to stretch themselves because they were incredibly talented and had a ton of ideas, but just weren't honestly interested in producing anything with them. So how do I fix this problem? Well, I decided that the cumulative project for the end of the year had to do more than what I was doing with my smaller work. And so I really started to think about creating something that was more concerned with them producing a product versus demonstrating understanding with content. I think that they had become very accustomed to showing, hey, look, I know this content, but never, and also figuring out the shortest way from point A to point B. And so I really wanted to come up with something that didn't emphasize content so much, but rather the process and the critical thinking that goes into creating a product. I really wanted to come up with something that allowed them to use their creativity. What can they do? How can they be creative? And also I wanted to deal with this issue of technology. And so these students have also become very accustomed, because they're around the technology and know how to use the technology, to using it as a way of saying, hey, look, I put this technology in here, but it really means nothing. And so I wanted to find a project that addressed that. Let's not just use technology for the sake of saying, hey, I put this really great technology thing on this, but rather something that has true meaning. I wanted them to work together. And I wanted to capitalize on this cohort mentality. The students had been together and working together for 18 months. They worked well together. But I wanted to capitalize on that relationship they had with each other and start to create something using that relationship to create something really valuable. And lastly, I really wanted to play with the idea of authentic audience. They were great at projects, but I don't think they really ever understood the idea of having an audience besides a teacher look at the product they're producing. So I really wanted to come up with something that addressed that. With that being said, and thinking about the 4 C's that we've talked about all semester, this particular project should work. If I'm coming up with something that's hitting all of these things, it should grab my students. So what did I come up with? Okay, so the project, I decided to create a timeline museum. In our I2 lab, I had space enough and access to enough technology in the lab for the students to build a walking museum. The walking museum would depict the time periods in American literature, from colonialism to realism to naturalism, modernism, postmodernism. They would be able to depict those time periods in history, how the history related to the literature, and also demonstrate the most memorable authors, the different types of work that came from those time periods. After the museum's created, I wanted the students to develop lesson plans for the lower level students at Westall to visit the museum and learn from the museum. That's my authentic audience. And then I wanted this I2 students to facilitate a presentation day that would serve as an EOCT review for these lower level students. So not only would my students benefit by creating the museum, working through creating a product, but also they would learn by teaching their peers something that they need to know to be prepared for the EOCT. And I felt like this project was going to hit all of those avenues of being able to collaborate, being creative, and most importantly, giving them that authentic audience. So you can see here by my picture here on the slide, Turn Down for What? This is a image one of my students, I think, caught of me in action that circulated around and pretty much describes kind of my relationship with them. I always have big picture and big ideas. And when I started this project, it was, whoa, big, huge project. And so I quickly figured out that I had to scaffold, that the students, even as talented as this group of students that I was working with, they had to be scaffolded in order to be able to achieve the goals that I had planned. So I took a step back and I divided the project into stages. The first stage was information gathering. I divided my class into groups of 5 and had 7 groups. Each group was assigned a time period. And then information gathering stage was basic information. What is your time period about? What years does your time period represent? What works of literature happened during those time periods? And how does the history relate to your time period? And I had the students collect this information and place it into a collaborative class document on Google Drive. From there, I created learning objectives. Everybody had their information. Now I wanted them to think about what they wanted the visitors to learn from the museum. When they came to their exhibit, what did you want your visitors to walk away with? Once again, I had this stage of the project created on a collaborative Google Doc. I wanted the great thing about this collaborative Google Doc is all of the groups, everybody in the class is working on this one document together simultaneously. Information is going into it. I can see it all happen in the class period sitting at my computer. I'm able to stand in the middle of the room and say, hey, Roland, I think what you've got going here is a really good idea. Why don't you look at that, Ethan, and see where you can pull his ideas into your group. And it really works well together, and they're able to page and look at their ideas. And I use those collaborative documents throughout this whole project. I also could change on the fly. If something wasn't working, I could just change the document and re-guide the students' thinking very quickly. From the learning objectives, I had them then begin to create their exhibits. Now this could go either way. I opened it up where they could use Technology, they could use paper, pencil, poster, whatever they could find in the lab. And believe me, these kids used everything and anything they could find. I had tents up in the room, I had poster board, I had drawings, very creative. I also had groups use video presentations. I had groups use QR codes. There was tons of technology used, but it wasn't the first thing they went to. I always question when they use the technology, why are you doing this? What is it teaching your visitors that are coming to your museum? If it's not teaching them something and you're just putting it there for the sake of putting it there, then let's rethink our use. Okay? Once we created the lesson, the exhibits, then we began working on the lesson plans. The lesson plans took a little bit more time, and we worked together as a group to develop those plans. The students all brainstormed together and discussed and decided to create a scavenger hunt that would use cell phones or the smartphone technology that the visitors would already have on them. Each group created 5 questions for the scavenger hunt. Once again, we used a collaborative doc to do so. From there, the students began planning their presentation day. Traffic flow alone into the room, we knew we were going to have up to 50 guests a class period, and that's a lot of students for them to keep engaged and moving through the museum, so they had to plan for that. So technology, yes, in this particular project, as a teacher from my end, I used technology to help me facilitate the project happening on their end. So using Google Drive and the collaborative class documents was very valuable. Then the students took technology and then were able to use it in the ways they needed to use it to present their product in the museum. So I had students using video editing, QR codes. You would scan the QR codes with the tablets or with smartphones, and it would bring up video content that they had located and linked to those QR codes. It would also bring up PowerPoint presentations that they had created on Google Drive, and different ways of using QR codes. Then our school is a BOD school, so that as part of the scavenger hunt, they requested that the students bring their own devices in when they visited. And the scavenger hunt required different things, required them to take selfies with different people and explain why that was part of that time period. Any way that they could come up with is engaging their visitors with the technology. I was really strong with this with the students, that you're not using the technology to make it shiny or something fun, but you're using it to facilitate your visitors' learning. How is it helping them learn? If it's not helping them learn, then we shouldn't use it, or we should look for something else. So how did I determine whether the project was a success or whether the students had achieved what I needed them to achieve? So I had a set rubric that I assessed their product against. So I looked at their exhibits. Had they met the requirements that I set forth? But I also felt that assessing this was to see the engagement of the lower level students. How effective were the exhibits in engaging the lower level students, and did the students learn something? And that assessment came from the responses that my lower level students made on the scavenger hunt. Were they successful at locating the answers? If they were successful at locating the answers, then I knew that they had some learning. So the project was not only assessed from a rubric that I created, but it was also assessed from the scavenger hunt that the students created and then helped the other students through. I also felt like the project was assessed on how effective my I-Square students were able to lead their own instruction. How did presentation day go? And were they able to effectively lead and manage the museum without teacher intervention? And they were really quite impressive. So what did I learn in all of this experience? First things first is that kids are actually quite amazing. Especially this group of kids that I had. I knew I had something special with them. The chemistry in this class was great from the beginning. They had been together for pretty much since middle school, 7th grade. They'd all been together and learning together. And so when I was introduced into the mix, they loved to see me learn with them just as much as they like to learn from me. So you can even see in this picture, this was just a snapshot. This is daily what this class would look like. Oftentimes, they would be at the front leading class. I would be facilitating in the back. It was just a really, really special group. With that being said, I also learned that scaffolding was necessary. I had to scaffold the instruction. And then also buy-in.